So I see that we have a full forum tonight, right? So it's fine for we get started. So I'll call the meeting to order and begin with the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have a motion to accept the agenda? Thank you. Thank you. And any additions to the agenda? Okay. All in favor of accepting the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of February 5th.
Moved.
Thank you, Fran. Any additions, corrections, changes to the minutes? Okay. All in favor of accepting minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Any correspondence, Bonnie?
No, just those handouts.
Okay. All right. Madam Tax Collector, do you have a report for us today?
Very short, just to say I'll be at the tax collectors convention next week, and I hope to have the attorney who will do the tax sales. Hopefully he can get them done by the end of the year. We're down to 4 properties and 3 people.
Thank you. Or did you wish to make a report tonight or just
I think we'll
use
just
the presentation
Yeah, I
later?
think the presentation.
Thank you. Ian? It's like the wind, right? Let's get down to the treasure for the topic. Anything?
No, but I don't know where on the agenda the auditor is. but
He is
I-
next.
Then let me introduce our auditor. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks for having me here tonight.
Thank you.
Being. Pleasure to be here. Now.
Even if there's snow.
Right. You know, we've had any snow all year.
Right.
So we did lose power yesterday. We have a tax due date today, so we're going to scrambling. Our office is part of all the time when we couldn't get in. We had a taxes thing. What I gave you just here is a 2-page handout. This is going to be big. It's 5 years of history of your fund balance. So it's more a point of reference than it is something that would be in your report. But it's something that I often do for boards because it takes, we have a 77-page page file. And I'm not going to present the report by pages. Very full agenda, but I will try not to take up too much of your time. But I'm also here for you and for a question. Everyone wants to know for the auditor today. One is, everything okay? Got anything to report, finance issues, problems? Answer that as well. If you're here to that meeting now, I didn't do my job. You heard that from me before. So, no, everything's good. You got clean audit reports, no findings. The language in the auditor opinion letter changed, which just for the heck of it, was our profession again. Well, one side of the 3 pages of verbiage was better to say everything's okay, but we could change all our pages. So, but everything's fine. You had a state single audit for your state grants. You were not required to do a federal single audit because you're below 750,000 federal expenditure. And then you got a couple of big projects going, 80% funding from the feds, road projects, bridges. That often get kicked that requirement in. You can do that if you need it. You prefer not to when you certainly aren't. You don't have to. So that's. So the handout that I gave you, well, the second thing people want to know is where do we stand and where are we at? So you've had a draft your report, and I'm going to point out a couple pages in that
But this is kind of a one snapshot history of 5 years that says, what's your fund balance, beginning and end? How did it change? What did you expect it to be and where did it end up? So just looking at 2022 here, you started the year in the top number with 3.4 million in fund balance. You designated 486,000 of that. You expected to have a deficit. That was your budget for 21-22. So you expected to end the year with 2.9 million. Well, you ended the year with 4.3 million in there because you had 872,000 more in revenue, 532,000 less in expenses. But you used a good chunk of that to designate to next year's budget. That's why it's timely as you guys are passing budget to get this to you, and we normally would not be here in March, so doing that. But you're now passing 23-24 budget. I know you have draft out and the presentations, but this is where you stand the end of 22, what gives you your unassigned balance. But out of the 4.3 million, you've got 100,000 that's on non-spendable. You have 527.5 assigned to next year, and you have 3.2 million that's unassigned at the end of the year, which represents 25.2% of the budgeted expenses. And that's often how towns are measured in what is the health of the town. How much should we have in fund balance? What's our policy? What's our guideline? What do we want it to be? And often what people do is, well, what does everybody else do? What do our neighbors do? And that's what the second page of this is for you. It should be driven by what someone else does. And we ought to, nine local towns right now, as well as 8 or 9 taxing districts. Actually, it's not like 12. In any event, what one person's doing is not necessarily what somebody else is doing. I had a Board of Finance meeting a month and a half ago where they wanted to keep their balance below 10. Most want to be above 15. Okay, so comparatively, this gives you where you're at locally to where everybody else is. And a lot depends on facts and circumstances. This is all from public information. We're comparing Kent, comparing your towns within the school district, and then I added in a couple others that were similar in size, readily available. So you can take that for what it is. Cornwall is abnormally high, but they're setting money aside for their septic issues that are going on. So there's usually reasons for it and what's there. So.
Here, I seem to recall from previous conversations, it was a percentage that was more favorable for us for bond, if we wanted to bond.
Yeah, bonding agent's gonna look to have 15 probably as a minimum, that they're gonna think healthy of you. The GFOA, the General Finance Officers Association, would say have 6 months, but that's a very guideline based on what's there. That would be way too high for a town to have. That would be for our local government. Usually we see between 15 and 20 as a fund balance number. Some towns set a minimum fund balance requirement to maintain, but it's there. It should be used for what you decide to do. This is the body that's doing that.
And in general, this looks pretty positive.
Very positive. They get a very positive year. So many of the local towns the last 2 years have expected the worst and have ended up being very financially healthy. So instead of having, not bringing in the revenue that they thought, people unable to pay their taxes, being concerned about that, what they found is, well, during the times that people couldn't go out, they've all been fixing up their homes and everyone was refinancing. So conveyance taxes were really high. People were buying, people were moving in. Building permits exceptionally high coming in. Your tax collector does a very good job collecting on everything and tax bills, maintaining that. So you've done very well on all those things, and many of the towns have. So, and you haven't tapped the ARPA funds. Some of the towns have tapped the ARPA funds because when those first came out, they're designated for specific things. And then there was a formula, and then they ultimately came out and said, if it's under $10 million to a local town, you can just keep it, just put in your fund balance if you want, do what you want with it. That was,
We already dispersed it.
well, I think it's better. I think personally, the tax credit is better than it's going for what it's designated for and assigned for. I know you have a commission doing all that there. So those are one-time things, but you haven't tapped into anything unusual in order to build it to that point.
Are we considered, I mean, besides relatively healthy? I guess that percentage, you know, the question might be, are we too conservative? And by that, I mean, you know, as we look for other means of support for our operations government wise, one of the things they look at is your mill rate too low and is, you know, and frankly, is that ratio too high, or is it so high that we think you don't need our help?
I don't know that you're not getting any help because of it necessarily, with the exception of possibly some education funding, but you're not gonna get that anyway these days. After the state changed the formula.
Right.
Two of the more wealthier towns saw their ECS money go
Right.
way down, but you don't get a lot of that anyway relative. So no, I don't think it's hurting you in that way. Is it too conservative? You know, I guess I leave that for the boards to decide.
Right.
You know, ultimately, but yeah, you want to have a fund, you have to have a fund balance in order to do things. When you want to do a large grant project, for example, you got to have resources to do it. Almost every grant works on a reimbursement basis. You have to spend the money. So if you got a $2 million grant, you might have to shell out $2 million and spend it, and then submit for reimbursement, wait for them to approve it before you get the cash back. And you either got to finance that somehow or be able to do it.
Okay, thank you.
On the audit report itself, if you have a copy with you, if there's a one there, I'm only going to point to a couple of pages, but I'm happy to take any questions. And the audit report can be very difficult to read from front to back. Accountants have a way of making numbers. There's three distinct sets of accounting principles used in your financial statements. You have a set of statements that are full accrual, where we got fixed assets and we've got debt. You got a set of statements that are GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and then you got a set of statements that are budgetary, which is what you want to pay attention to as your budgetary statements. The only difference between the budgetary and the GAAP is really, there's about $600,000 of state on behalf money that gets paid. We have to put it in and out, but it confuses people when it's there.
That's the teacher.
I'm happy to walk through anybody with those numbers, but I don't want to take your time tonight if you don't want to. Me too. But in here, I would skip to page 4. I mean, there's a lot of very good information, don't get me wrong, in the front of the report, the summary. Barbara did a great job going through and fixing all my nuances and adding to that there as well. So the page 14 is kind of where I would start, which is the balance sheet of the town. And again, this will be relatively quick. The balance sheet of the town shows total cash in the town of, 8.3 million. That includes most of that's in the SNF account. You do have several $1 million at Union and Webster that fall above the insured thresholds. And I know with the news last week and the Bank of California failing,
The matching.
push them on, getting a repurchase agreement or something in place for more security on that. Those are very.
Well, that was
solid.
actually on my list of questions, was in light of that, or, did you, in the audit process, look at our cash management process or procedures and find anything that merited? I didn't see anything in your footnotes or analysis that waved a flag about it. Is that because it didn't need a flag, or is it simply that it wasn't an issue?
I wouldn't say there's an issue on it. It would have been a flag if there was an issue on the cash management. There's no issue on cash management. You like every other town have a lot of accounts, which creates, complexity because there's differences, but there's also requirements to have a lot of those accounts. So they're needed. You do have things split up. You don't have everything in one bank. That would be a concern, we would say, because you couldn't tap it. You do have most of your free cash reserved in the STIF account, which is not an insured account, but it's the state of Connecticut Treasurer's Investment Fund, where most towns will park most of their money that way. It's up and down, obviously. But there is a note in the report that you do have a couple $1 million above the 250,000 threshold, because it's not very much money. That is technically uninsured. Some towns have the local banks. I know Union and Webster both do these, have a collateralization agreement in place. And I think after this week, you're going to start to see lots of calls to your bankers to do that. It's time to do it. It's all every bank does it too. But where they actually take at the bank and set aside treasury bills in your name held by the bank, and they measure that monthly to make sure that that's something I would look into.
And I just want to point out that these balances are on a specific day.
Right.
So sometimes, especially when July 1st hits and all the associations and individuals that can get grants from us know that they are available as of July 1, I've got to have that money
Exactly.
available. So that's part of it. It's part of a timing thing. There's so much in the bank on 6/30.
And again, most of it's in the specific account, but there is cash that's.
And two, the other side of that coin is just where rates have gone in the last year and where, you know, and the duration of the short / medium term instruments, and all of a sudden it's gap widening. And therefore being a potential decline in values of short term instruments that they might use as clients. Anything that you thought was beyond manageable.
Well, yeah, no, not in the town's case. I mean, the town can't invest in most of the things that would have an effect by that, because you're in cash equivalents
Right.
there.
So they're always short,
Being CDs or short term as part of a pool that the state's investing in, that's your best source for getting earnings on it. And, you know, maybe that'll be a benefit if rates are up, you know, earnings will go up, but
They have been.
they have been
They
now.
exceeded.
They have been now, so.
Not for interesting.
Right, at least from zero almost, right?
Well, I think 15,000.
Right.
or over.
Excellent question, and then, yes, something I was gonna talk about, especially with something that is. But again, back on page 14, real quick, the general fund, you'll see your fund balance here, 3,239,000. That's the third number from the bottom in the first column. That's the unassigned balance. That's your key number for June 30, 22. So what you've already allocated for 22, 23 is not included in that. So that's if all things break even, that's what would be available for 23, 24. And where is that? It's not tied up. There's no accounting gimmicks in here. It's all in the bank. You know, there's lots of accounts here, but there's nothing on. Page 16, we like even pages. So I was like, page 16 is revenue and expense. That's just a P&L summary. You know, for the three major funds, the general capital projects, the grant fund, and then the summary column for everything else. And this is a GAAP basis statement, so the totals here that have total revenue, total expenses, that's accrual. While this is GAAP, accrual is back on page 10, I'll go back to it once. Hard to see. Page 18, so. That's one of the things I want to point out. Page 18 is budgetary. And page 18 is what you're really looking at. Right. Revenue, expenses, and fund balance in total. So that's total fund balance there. You do have a difference though between the numbers on page 18 and the numbers on page 16, which is the GAAP versus budgetary. If you really want to tie that out, go to page 29, and there's the detail of why they don't match it and what the reconciliation is between them. But page 18 is the summary, budget and actual, and the detail of that is all on pages 52 to 55 in the back of the report, which all come forward and match up. Everybody's going to go home and put this up on there. You're going to look it up and say, I want to see the, I want to see the. Help you go to. So you've got a lot of detail on the back pages, 52 to 55. Page 39 in the footnotes is the breakdown of the fund balance. There's nothing that's wasn't also on page 16. The rear of the report has the tax collector schedule, the debt limitation schedule. I mean, so sometimes people wonder why town get in trouble. The state statute limits how much the town can borrow. Okay. Thankfully, the taxpayers limit how much our towns can borrow, because the state says you can borrow $78 million if you want to, before you exceed your borrowing capacity. Now they do break it down. You can only use 22 million of it for general purposes, or money for schools and sewers, et cetera. You don't have a lot of bonded debt out there. You've got your USDA loans. You've got a piece of the region share that shows up on here that's really not yours, and you've got authorized, but you haven't financed yet for projects that aren't funded at this point. We'll show on. I guess to take questions. I don't want to, again, I have your time. Answer anything?
I always at the end of an audit review like to ask simple questions, is there something that we should be asking that we have not?
That wasn't a trick question.
And just in the process, if you might just briefly describe for us the process itself, and especially as a new firm, what you found relative to the other municipalities you're working with. Was it easier? Was it harder? Was there anything you couldn't find, you know, that you needed to, or anything like that, that we once a year need to ask that question?
Absolutely. So was it easier? Yes. Was it harder? Yes. Was it was it easier? No. Was it harder? No. Yes. Some things, yes and no. One of the things I would say is you do a good job of not making things too complicated. That's what towns fall down when they try to build in some sophisticated systems sometimes. When we did fixed assets 20 years ago, they said, oh, everybody wanted to sell you these $50,000 programs. You don't get a $50,000 program. To take the building and divide it by 40, it's just a building divided by 40. It's not hard. Okay, now there's a lot of it, so it's about pages. Just add it up. It's not that hard. You're maintaining your books on, you know, you didn't go out and buy a $10,000 accounting program to do it. You don't.
I took them off that.
Yeah, you don't.
When I got here, Lindsay.
Okay. Munis is the worst accounting program around. It's like what the big cities use. It's horrible. It's like a 1970s accounting program. Everything's batch posted. You can't see anything, you can't find anything. When we get your records, you're using QuickBooks, okay? When QuickBooks first came out in the mid-90s, auditors wouldn't audit it because you could change things and you couldn't tell it had been changed. They fixed that in like 1997, right? Okay, so QuickBooks is very auditable, much more so even frankly than the rest, because Barwick is a copy of your QuickBooks records. So when we have that, one of the things we automatically run is an audit trail, and we can see what's changed, when did it change, why did it change? You know, that's just, and even ones we do, it's a posting here, oh, made that backwards, fixed it, no problem. But you can see, and we have used this in the past to find, you know, people doing things they shouldn't be doing. So when we have that level of detail, we can see all kinds of things. We can look at every transaction that went through in great detail. So that keeps it simple for you. You also keep it simple by not having too many companies. Some will have a different company for every fund. There's companies that are using, you know, again, other software packages out there, which are fine, but you need somebody trained in how to do it. And you need an onboarding process. So you're not doing that. So in that case, it's very, very good. Tax vector records are right on. And very good, everything matched up, no problem, and all that management. So timing wise, we'd like to be here earlier on things, so we'll make that a target and a goal for next year. There, we won't have a transition over to us. Hopefully things are a little simpler for you guys as well in that. Yeah, and you're maintaining things separate as you need them to be. You do need to understand, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that doesn't mean we looked at every transaction. That doesn't mean we looked at every check that went out. Doesn't mean we looked at, you know, we test things. Auditor provides reason, read the audit opinion if you look at that, or what it says. We didn't really do anything. It's your problem if it's wrong.
What's missing in it was, you said, I don't know if it's missing, but what you said was an evaluation of our own internal controls.
We issue a report on internal control and a report on compliance that are not opinions. You can't pay an auditor enough money to issue an opinion on internal control and on compliance. Actually, there isn't one really that you do. But the report is we look at the controls, we test to see if they're, you know, we understand what's going on, how you're doing things, why you're doing them that way. And then are you actually following those to an extent? We're not going to do a total deep dive on that. Compliance wise, well, I just wrote somebody up big time for a bunch of stuff because it was becoming issues. They didn't issue their 1099s. Well, they hired a consultant to do it. He insists they did it. Well, they didn't do it. It's a big problem. You know, I've had people that didn't file their grant reports. Well, we can tell, we can see, we get reports back from the state independent that we can access to see what's been reported, both on the school side and on the town side. We love when OPM contacts us because, well, you know, did they get this money? I'm like, well, you gave it to them. You reported here. Anyway, so in that sense, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but we don't test every single transaction, obviously. But we don't have any comments of anything that's an issue for the board.
Anyone else have questions?
Okay.
I can come to any other meeting to just make a request. I'm not limited to once a year on that, but I do encourage you, if you have questions, if you have anything that comes up, if you want input on anything, please ask. We'd be very happy to answer anything we can, very happy to provide input on anything. That would be helpful. We serve the town and we work for the board. We work with the treasurer, we work with management, but we work for the board. Engage us, require us, and we report to you.
Here we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Right. That was sort of positive. Yeah.
The only thing that I'll add to what he talked about was on the bottom of page 9, gives you the general fund budgetary highlights, so that gives you what the surplus was from last year. That's always a hot button issue. And just what the primary contributing factors to that surplus were. Page 10.
Yeah, that was very helpful. You have that in there.
And clean letter, which is,
Yeah.
right, so congrats to the.
Well done, Barbara.
Yeah.
So to go back to the high undesignated fund balance, I think I floated the idea with you previously that we might be able to just, instead of issuing debt service to pay for phase 1 of the streetscape, we should just maybe pay for it out of our undesignated general fund and bring it back down to a nice level and also not incur any debt.
Especially given the rates.
Yes, it is a lot higher than it's ever been. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I have been talking to our financial advisor and he did issue some information to me, so at another meeting when we have a little less on the agenda, we'll start looking into that.
Good. All right, and we skipped over our the selectmen's report.
Right.
You were otherwise engaged. Got anything for us?
Short and sweet, we met today this afternoon to approve the budget with a bunch of changes that we made to it because of the storm and the outages yesterday. We're Barbara's updating the document and
It's on the schedule to be released to you all by Friday.
Right.
But the way I'm going to release it is what I've been doing and putting it in that shared drive, because otherwise I get a million emails from one copy, so it's just easier.
I thought it was a week ago.
And by the way, given the lack of snow this year, have we had a real benefit in this year's, budget as a result?
It's hard to say, the winter isn't over. And I know that Rick tries to manage his snow budget very efficiently, so it's hard to say.
And it's not just snow.
Oh, okay.
It's
Last couple of weeks.
That's right. And there's mud. When there's not snow, there's mud.
Right, there's also, if there's rain and then if it dips down to a certain degree, then it's gotta, get out and treat the road and start retreating.
So there's no windfall anyway today.
Not yet. Sharpen the pencils a little closer for June.
Okay.
If you haven't already jinxed us.
Right. Thanks.
Really take care of us up on the hill.
This is perfect.
It was a long 30-ish hours, but not very, very long slide.
All right, I always have my question, the cell tower, any news on its activation?
No, and I finally have gotten a government relations point of contact at Verizon. And I called her about a week ago and
There was another antenna. When I drove by the other day, it looked like there was a second one.
that might have something to do with the Homeland Towers transferred the certificate with the site council for the tower, and it may have something to do with that transfer. Because they would have to put in an application to Verizon or to go on the tower, so we get that from them.
Any update on Skype?
Nothing.
Stay tuned, right? Yeah, all right. So your cell service is no better, is it? Okay. All right, so we have our audit presentation, so Board of Ed, welcome.
Let's come to the table. Yeah.
Please, please do.
Okay, does everybody have a copy?
I do.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, so our plan for tonight is to go through each kind of subtotal, and then we can go back and address any line specific questions that you have, rather than trying to address each line. Right? So the first thing is, before we get into the subtotals, you know, like every budget, this is a process, right? We start with the draft, and then, you know, in 4 to 6 weeks, we end up with our final budget. So just keep in mind that our starting point, our initial draft was a 4.58% increase. Okay, so that was our initial starting point. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna hit on the subtotals. Certified personnel is an increase of 4.61%. Professional non-certified is an increase of 5%. Non-certified personnel is a decrease of 4.28%. So total salaries is an increase of 2.58%.
Non-certified.
Sorry, say it again.
The decrease in non-certified.
Yeah, so the decrease in non-certified was the result of the loss of. There was a position last year that we didn't replace.
Right.
So that's been the big number. That's continuing.
Well, it's a different one than we got cut for last year. This is a new, we're reducing by one more paraprofessional from last year.
Is that because you're having trouble getting them or any other districts or?
It's because we're trying to work with you.
We intentionally didn't fill the position. It's not gonna be couldn't fill the position.
So you are, right,
They love
keeping
what
with your
We're
approach,
keeping
which is
with
look at
our-
everything when it comes open and ask that
Yeah.
question
Yes.
at least, so.
Yes. Any other questions before I move? And we can come back.
Yeah, okay, I'll wait till the end.
Okay. Employee benefits is an increase of 7.05%. Purchase professional and technical services is a decrease of 30.67%. Sounds like a big percentage, but it's not a large number. Purchase property services, an increase of 1.92%. Other purchased services is an increase of 3.98%. Total supplies is an increase of 6.02%. Total property is an increase of 0.73%. Dues and fees was flat. So that gives the Kent Center School total expenditure, it's an increase of 3.59%. So we started at the 4.58, we're down to 3.59, so just about 1%. But then when you roll in the regional expenditures, that's a decrease of 6.72%. So when we net out the total education expenditure is an increase of 0.09% or just over $6,000.
And the regional, sorry, it's just
The
census.
decrease?
Yeah.
So there's 3 regional budgets. There's the high school budget, there's pupil services, and then there's RSSC. So the high school budget and pupil services, each of the 6 towns pays per pupil. So it's based on, I think it's the October of the year before. It's based on your enrollment October 1st of the year before. RSSC budget, which is the smallest of the 3. But the RSSC budget is just divided 7 ways or 6 ways.
Okay.
So that's the only one that's not per pupil. So I guess to answer your question, it's because of the number of kids that Kent ultimately sends to the high school.
Sure.
You know, the budget is up, the Region 1 budget is up, it's just that our
Our share.
portion, our share is
Okay.
down.
Okay, but since we're looking at this whole thing anyway, given that the census for our students is declining, it's enabled you to basically come in total.
Pretty much flat. I would call that very close.
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, that's interesting. The other interesting question I had was on the substitute teachers, is that day per day a week set by the state, or is that our own budgetary decision?
It's not set by this. I think it's set at the region level.
Yeah.
The state is
That's the.
Yeah, it's definitely not by the state.
Pretty low pay these days.
It's like,
It's
low.
110.
Yeah.
A day. Which is, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
That's less stuff, I mean.
which very well may be one of the reasons it's very difficult to get
Right.
subs. Very difficult.
Although there's been a big effort to recruit more and
We
we've been
have.
very successful.
Yes.
The central office has been very hard to, they've been having
That's kind of maybe a little, that's something you might actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Be careful, Jason.
Yeah. Careful what you say out
Now,
loud.
the other question on this is the increase for, it was the principal number, which was.
Yep, so we can talk about that.
Yes.
So, for a bunch of the administrators in the region,
Sure.
we have recently done, so at the high school and at several of the elementary schools, we've recently done a market study
Mhm.
to just see where, where our administration is being paid in comparison to, similar
Sure.
towns,
Right.
size and location and what we found is that not only at Kent Center School, but also other administrators within the region are underpaid in comparison to their peers in other towns. And so this is an attempt to get the principal up to a level that we can't do it all in 1 year, so we're gonna split it over a couple of years, but the intent is to get her, a bit of a bump because, she's definitely, in comparison,
Sure.
is on the low.
That was what, it's 7.5
7.5.
for this year, so then you would expect.
We would expect next year something to be similar.
Yeah, I mean, because I always tend to, again, you guys set the policy, et cetera, but in an inflationary period, and also, I was like, in governments, in general, should try at least to kind of come in below where inflation is, because otherwise we're adding to the inflationary pressures.
Yeah, this has been something that as Jen said, nationwide, that
Sure.
I think, you and me have kind of spearheaded a little bit to really take a look at comparative numbers, because it really hadn't been done before. And one thing to note about the principals in our region is they act almost as mini superintendents. They're in a regular unified school district, the superintendent will prepare the budget, will do the bulk of the teacher evaluation, will be the one who serves on the facilities committee and, running the building projects. In our region, the principals do all that. So they're required to do more than your average principal. And with that, they're also, their salary compared to other schools was a little bit low. We found. It's a region-wide effort, as Jen said, to try to get that back up to, a market rate amount.
So your administrators are not part of a bargaining unit.
That's right. Any other line specific items, is there anything specific you have questions about?
Pretty clear, I thought, actually, yeah.
Could I just highlight two more things under the salaries? We talked about reducing a paraprofessional position. We've also done a similar thing with a network administrator. He's retiring this year, and we're looking, instead of replacing him with a full-time position, we're trying to replace him with a part-time position. So we got a lot of savings out of that line. That's a 24% reduction in that line, $19,000. And as well as our office staff, we've worked with the region to share work a little bit. So we're taking some of that salary and it's being paid by the region now because they're going to do a little bit of work for the region. So we were able to reduce that line. They're getting their raise like everybody else, but the line is showing a 4% decrease. So two other areas where we were trying to, in the spirit of our discussion. Okay.
Anything else?
I think it's just in our conversations, noticing that you know, if yours, by the way, staying true, this notion of kind of rolling into this budget, and as long as it's not presenting added stress onto the overall budget, you're probably estimating to manage financially. You know, I'm more concerned about that than, you know, pulling out, as long as we're not, you know, going up significantly, because I think that over time, that would be less of an issue for us.
We're gonna see what else would
Well, right.
come in here. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good initial conversation, thank you.
For increasing tuition, tuition reimbursement,
Where is that?
Well, that's for the fact, and it's not increasing amount. Yeah, that's for the teachers,
Professional development.
yeah. And so we have a couple extra this year that are. So I think it's like a $700 or something.
Yeah, seven,
continuing.
it's continuing
Yeah,
education.
it's not student tuition.
Okay.
We have some teachers going back to get their sixth degree, or their sixth year.
And they have to, right? I mean,
They don't have
they-
to. I mean, they don't, no, I mean, it's not a requirement.
It's not, but it's good for us.
But
I'm
it's-
sure,
yeah.
And it's good for them.
Right,
Right.
and it's only a part, you know, what we reimburse is only a portion of their total tuition expense.
And eventually they'll hit the salary budget, but
Right.
that's
It
not.
affects the staff
That's right.
schedule,
It
definitely, sure.
does, yeah.
So, the tuition amount, has there been any further conversation about that? Increasing the tuition being charged to out of district?
No.
Not since our last meeting when we all.
And I think we've all come to an agreement that we're well above what it's costing the town to accept a tuition student. We figured, and we all agreed at that joint meeting that it costs the town about $500 to add at most a tuition student to the system, and we're charging $4,500, so we're making close to $4,000.
As long as it doesn't tip the need for additional help, because
And it can't,
in essence, the taxpayers are paying the difference between the 4,500 and the 30,000, because those students are being figured in to the net expenditure per pupil calculation.
should we start that conversation? Is that the next thing on the agenda?
It's later on, but if you want to have it now, you can certainly.
So, yeah.
Excuse me, this is Casey. I've never really had explained to me or gone out of my way to try to understand exactly how the out-of-town student process works for those who are paying that tuition. So maybe somebody could give me a tutorial. How many Kent taxpayer family students do we have at the Kent Center School? How are they admitted? Do their towns pay them or the individuals pay? What I guess I just heard was 4,500.
We have 22 tuition students right now that their families pay. We charge them $4,500 per student and half that for a sibling. So right now, we're collecting about $80,000 in tuition that goes right into the town's general fund. That's not allowed to be used by the school. What was your other question? I don't know if you remember, Casey, I think I sent you that breakdown of the tuition expense versus tuition amount collected. We went through our budget and identified any line that could possibly, in any conceivable way, be affected by adding a student to the population. And we divided that total, we added those lines up, I think there was 10 lines. We added those lines up, and divided them by the number of students, and came out with about $500 at the most that it would, cost to add a new student to that mix. But that included numbers like field trips, which wouldn't actually rise, because you're hiring a bus. You don't hire 2 buses because you have 1 more student. And in our policies, the board approves the tuition request, the family will request to place their student in school as a tuition student. It has to be approved by the board. We're allowed to refuse if we want.
And it's an annual process.
It's an annual process. We approve all the tuition students. it states in our policies that the $4,500 covers just basic education. If there are any other special education needs that we would either negotiate or have to, end the agreement.
And what towns do these students come from?
They largely come from like Dover Plains and Wingdale over the border in New York. We do have a few from Gaylordsville. That
Pretty
encompasses,
much,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, they're all, neighboring towns that, they can be driven to by their parents, basically.
Yeah, and do our neighboring towns, not that they want to, because our school is excellent, but do our neighboring towns in Connecticut, in Litchfield County, do the same thing? Do they accept other students?
Yeah, the other towns in the region do the same, except for Salisbury.
Right, and do we know of any Kent students going out of Kent to a different school?
Just the private schools.
Right.
There are, yeah.
Not to other region one schools. Not that I know of.
And so what you're saying, if there's somebody who's coming from another town who, for one reason or another, is not an ideal person to have in the school, at the end of the year, you could tell
Yes.
them they were invited back. And is there a admissions interview, a process before anybody else comes in, or can just anybody come in?
Not with the board, but with Michelle. She meets with the parents, meets with the family, explains the parameters of the agreement, our policies and so forth. And I don't know if there's an evaluation, educational evaluation. I'm not positive.
I think they have to submit some documentation, I think they have to resubmit some educational information.
And I think just to hop on to Casey's questions a bit, the $500 number,
Yeah.
which my gut tells me is too low, but it's okay. I mean, it's too high, obviously, because I'm making an assumption and I'm saying, let's, for argument's sake, let's make that $1,000. Okay, that's what I'm saying, as opposed to drilling into this thing and having whatever it is, right? Now, what I did when I look at it, I said, I'm gonna assume it's more like $1,000, frankly. Because we do have
I
to
just have to say
Right.
that I feel strongly it's less than.
Okay, but I'm saying from a budget, so when we decide though, when we're looking at your budget, I can look at it and if I say it's $1,000, you're still right above doing, bringing in significantly
Comfortably above.
And I know it's not the 4,500, so therefore, that's what I'm saying, as opposed to, we can get into all kinds of arguments over just what the actual number is.
Yeah.
And so I think you can take a little bit more conservative approach because you're still covered.
We feel very
Like 4.5
comfortable that
times.
we're well above, that we're not costing the town any money. And I hope we do get a chance to get into this conversation about the NCEP because I think as a business manager of a school that does not represent the amount that the taxpayers pay for our students in the school.
We'll get to that.
I mean, I focused on that as well. I understand that there's room and this is monies that we otherwise wouldn't have. But if somebody, and we'll get to it, and obviously I have a minimal amount of knowledge about it, but if somebody, especially since you also attached what the other towns rates were, if somebody was going to say, what is it, what does it cost to send the Kent children to Kent Center School? The ratio would change, but I'll let you take it. I just one final question. How long have we been doing the tuition program in terms of having outsiders into?
5 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say 3 or 4, but maybe it's 5.
I've been on the board for almost 3 and it's been before my time, so.
I know people who were on the board like 20 years ago and 25, 30 years ago, and the tuition back then, I think was 12,000 something.
I
Maybe
think
that's
that-
when we changed the number was.
Yeah, and there's been some back and forth and we might have even taken it away at some point, but I think this
May have.
latest iteration is, 4 or 5 years.
I mean, I'm on the one hand, in terms of the numbers, I certainly understand whatever it is, 500,000, they're paying more than that. So there's a gain to the
General fund.
the general fund to the town from having those funds. On the other hand, given whatever the cost is, and I'll let you guys go ahead and do that, the parents of these students are getting a pretty nice deal.
Yeah, but the parents of Kent students aren't paying, even if the NCEP number were accurate, they aren't paying that to send their kids to school. That's a shared cost from the whole town. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
split.
they're not paying it, they're paying their taxes and what have you, but you know, they're part of our community. The people who live in Dover Plains and Wingdale are not part of our community. And if they're paying $4,500 and, you know, the town is paying something, and you'll explain what the number should be, but something certainly, you know, many times the 4,500 coming from the tax fund, then those people in New York State are getting a very sweet deal.
Well, I don't know about that. Like on, you know, around a $300,000 property, you're paying about $500 or $5,000 in taxes a year. And that splits to the selectmen's budget and the education budget. These people from out of town are paying $4,500 just to go to the school. You know, so I don't know that they're getting such a sweet deal, actually. I mean, I think it's worth it to them because we offer such a great education and they're unhappy with, you know, what's being provided in their own town.
Right.
But I don't think that, you know, that's really accurate, actually.
Well, the people who are paying a lot more than that in taxes are part of the Kent community and certainly would feel a responsibility to have a great school in Kent for all the children in Kent, whatever their families are paying in taxes. And they might not feel the same way about paying that for people from Dover Plains or Wingdale. But
I think it would stem from a misunderstanding of, you know, what's really happening there.
I think the other important thing, and I know we're gonna talk about this later, so I don't wanna totally hijack the conversation, but I think when students come in from other towns, you know, it obviously increases our enrollment, but it also, you know, it enables us to have sports teams that sometimes we can't, you know, we don't have enough kids in the school to man the sports teams. You know, they go to the library, they shop at local businesses, you know, they buy a birthday present at the House of Books, or they go to Giffords for lunch, or, you know, whatever. I think there's some economic stimulation to the town in a broader sense as well. And I think I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Well, and part two, because I think for the voters and Kent, I think we talked about this in our session, which is also the notion that we've got, you know, a school of a decent quality in this town, right? Which we're very fortunate about, although it was not by accident. So I understand that. And part of which is demography, you know, and the issues that have in terms of class size, et cetera, in the town. And we need to have a school which has the capacity so that as the town grows, we're able to offer that experience, and you can't turn it on and off. And I think one of the things we talked about was the notion of there are some grades where there are a small number of students where we would benefit. Our students would benefit having more kids in classes.
Yeah.
Certain things happen in the class based on the fact that you're not 3 kids in a class, frankly, which is, there's a diminishing return that certain, you know, at a certain size of a class. And to the extent that bringing in some other students at a level of tuition that we know is not, you know, frankly, hindering the budget increase, I'm comfortable with, because I'm more focused on just that experience in the school and the fact that, you know, I've talked to some parents who don't like the fact that I've got a kid with 7 kids in class because there's not enough in that case. And I just think you guys have to talk more about that in terms of, because I think that's actually a benefit you're providing to the other students. We're gonna have some classes that are too small or the optimal experience, you know, in a school like that.
Well, and also I think we looked at all of the other tuition around the surrounding towns, and we're
the highest.
the highest. You know, there's I'm personally a little frustrated because we keep going back to this, frankly, I think BS number of 30,000.
It's not a BS number, it's calculated by the state. It's
But this is, it's not,
I would like to go back to, I mean, I'm hearing this, oh, it's a ridiculous number. It is not a ridiculous
this is
number,
not
which is why
calculated by the state, this is calculated by state.
no, it's not.
Yes, it is. You
Well,
said
I
it.
this is good.
Excuse me, I would like to be able to take you through the information that I brought. The think tank was merely providing you with some definitions. The reports are from the state website, and anybody in this room can go to the state website and see them.
Yeah, I have it right here. I printed it all out.
Yeah,
So are we gonna, do you want to do your other business, then we'll come back to that?
that's
I mean, it's
fine.
on your agenda, right?
That's fine, I guess, I wanted to take the board of finance through it to make sure that they all understood exactly what it was. It was not to make any decisions tonight. It was simply to go over the information to make sure that everybody understood what it was, because it keeps being said that it doesn't mean anything. And I'm sorry, it does mean something. So.
I agree with you.
Interpret it. It's very much, you know, up to you. It's your personal interpretation, and I respect that. But I would like you to respect what I'm trying to do as far as giving information to the board of finance.
I do respect it and I've prepared for the conversation and I'm anxious to have it.
Okay?
Should I start?
Pardon me?
Should I start or would you like to?
No, we're not going to have that right now. We're going to continue on the rest of the meeting. Okay?
Yes.
So is there anything else on the Board of Ed budget that anybody would like to ask or comment on or anything?
Answered my question.
So, you know, it's always interesting to see what happens with the high school and what's gonna happen with the kids and who's gonna get how much of a percentage, because some years are diamonds and some years are stones, so.
Almost
Yeah,
got a stone this year.
yeah.
Well,
it's
and
why-
I mentioned, and I kind of asked the question about the principal's salary, the only, optically, I do think it's a bit of an issue for you in terms of equity, right? It looks like, and you know, that we're top heavy in terms of what we're doing, and the guys at the bottom of the pay pyramid, you know, in the school, you know, and we seem very comfortable not doing much more for them, but then at the top, we seem to be doing significantly more. From an equity standpoint, and again, I raised this, you guys make your own decisions, but I'm just saying the optics, et cetera, you ought to frankly be concerned, and just, I would advise you to take a look at that and make certain you're comfortable where you come out.
I think we talk about that. We
Okay.
think about that a lot. We're not, you know, we're not blind to that. I think the challenge is that, you know, there's two unions within the school, right?
Mhm.
There's the certified
Sure.
contract, which is the teachers,
Mhm.
and then there's non-certified, which is, you know, paras and, you know, other people within the school who are not teachers.
Yeah, who else is that Ken Center?
Is the kitchen staff is in the,
I think there's the teachers union, but then the uncertified actually are some paraprofessionals.
oh, right,
Right, so like
that's
the
right.
nurse,
You're right.
the advisor, the paraprofessional.
They're part of the same bargaining unit.
No.
They're not a part of that,
Right.
right? So, right,
Right.
it's just
So it's
the
just the
certified
teachers.
So we
teachers.
just, that's right. You're
Just
right.
the one union.
So you got
Yeah.
principal, teachers,
Yeah.
everybody else.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, the challenge is always, you know, the teachers, unfortunately, because it's a lot of people in a union, you are a little bit limited.
Right, well,
In
you
what you can
negotiated
do.
that also, so that's.
Because there's a cost of, you know, there's kind of two pieces
Sure.
to that contract each year. There's kind of a cost of living expense, and then there's step costs, and depending on, you know, the longevity of
Right.
some of your teachers, you know, the step cost, if you're gonna give step, then the calculation is done for you, right? It's not, you don't have any, there's nothing you can negotiate other than to not give step if that's what has to happen. But if you're gonna give step, that number is determined for you. And so there can be a little bit, you know, you can add a little bit more for cost of living, but if it were up to me, those numbers would absolutely be higher, but I think, you know, again, you're talking about they're 3-year contracts. So, you know, I think that's hard. And then Scott, you're right, the others that don't fall within, the contract, that happens at budget time. And we gave the same increase to, right? I see that, but,
Consistent.
yeah, I'm the non-certified. It's very close. It's very close.
Well, I
and
only
then-
more raised, I said, you know, as long as you're looking at it, you know,
Yeah.
it's not our job to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
It's our job is, you know, but I just want to point it out at least, so that, you know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good point, and it's something we did talk about.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And it seems like you're very sensitive to that issue as well.
Yeah, we are.
Because we are the people that work with everybody.
Yes.
And with everybody's kids, right?
Right.
And I mean, this
Absolutely.
was a meeting, you know, our superintendent was involved, I mean, and we did some research, and it wasn't just. And I think it's, you know, slightly awkward right now, but I do think it's necessary.
I think it's the right thing
Yeah.
to do, and I would hope that everybody in the building understand and support that decision. You know, I personally haven't heard anything different, but, you know.
One of the things about Kent Center School that's always been very interesting, because there aren't a multitudes up here in the workforce. And so you take the talents that you have, and they're not part of the union, they're not part of the bargaining unit, and that gives you the flexibility to be able to maximize the talents that they bring in, and without having a humongous staff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I will say, I think it's, you know, I think it's fair to say that, you know, when we set the 5% for the non-certified, you know, it is just a little bit higher than the certified staff. And there was a discussion about that, you know, and whether, again, just the optics and the perception, and if that's okay. And again, I can only speak for myself, but my opinion is those people also, their salaries are lower than those of the certified staff. And so 5% of those salaries in comparison to, and again, the 4.61, of course, is not every single person gets the exact same, because you're talking step and everything, but, you know, I'm comfortable defending that position because, you know, they're very important people within our school, and they are not compensated at the same level as teachers.
But then that's in all school districts, I mean, that's just.
Absolutely, but I just want to make the point that we have these discussions when we make these decisions, so. Anything else? No? Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you.
Should we stay? I think the next thing on the agenda is the discussion. Do you want to-
Oh, yes. I was thinking it's after all the time.
It just fall into it, but-
Sure. We're gonna sit tight.
So what I would like to do.
By the way, did, the materials from the last meeting that you had, we talked about in the meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. Did we post that? Because I had several people ask me.
There were no minutes.
I couldn't, is that right?
Yeah, there were
I
no
will,
minutes.
I'll double check on that. I was
But
under the impression.
there were no decisions made, so I don't know. I mean, I didn't see any minutes.
The only reason I got sent it down by, there should be saying, well,
It should have been
that it
posted.
should have been posted because nobody knew.
Did it happen?
I'm sorry
Yeah.
if that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that it did. I think the minutes have been posted because the video link is on the minutes,
Right,
but I will go back.
And then the handouts there for.
But it wasn't-
If the handouts are not, we'll go back and
Because
make
I
sure.
think
that
there was a video at one point, it wasn't up, and I thought,
So let me double check on that.
Okay.
but I think it were the handouts that didn't get.
If the handouts aren't there, they
Right.
definitely should be. And we'll
Okay.
put that.
Okay.
All right, that's, sorry.
So what I sent to the board, and you all didn't.
You didn't get it to us.
Some of the information is, you know.
I found it myself, I think.
Yeah, so I used the net cost calculation that is on the state website. This was printed directly off the state website. That describes the net per expenditure, which is $29,510 per center school student. Mhm. And the taxpayers can't pay that much per student to go to Kent Center School. So it doesn't take any revenue from tuition into account.
Yeah.
So the next piece that I sent, which was from the school and state finance project, was simply to provide a description, because it was an easy description of what average daily membership meant and how is it used, and the other terms, the resident student count and such. And then the last piece I sent you was the printout of every single school district in the state and what their net current expenditure is per pupil. And the one that I find most interesting is our neighbor, I think it's Sharon, is like the top of the charts, or darn close to it. They're,
They've been high since the state.
there's about $2 per kiddo. It's 53,217, so it's like, wow. But they have low enrollment.
Right, that's it, they're going through a reduction, they're trying to cut their school down in half, and their cost per pupil, it's not really cost per pupil, it's net current expenditure
Per pupil, yes, but that's based upon
Last year it was
daily
40.
attendance.
That's right, so as your
the students.
enrollment goes down,
It jacks up your cost. So my point was, as the enrollment of our out-of-town students comes in, that lowers the net current expenditure per pupil. But the difference between the
the local students are down.
$4,500, the difference between the $4,500 and the $29,000 is being borne by the taxpayers. That's all.
That's simply not true.
Yeah.
It's just
I
simply
don't,
not true.
yeah, I actually know
Because
because
in order for that to be true,
Yes.
we would have to be adding $29,000 to our budget every time we took a new tuition student.
Mhm.
Or in other words, if we got rid of all our tuition students, our budget should be able to be reduced by $29,000 per times 22.
No, that's not what that number says.
It's not what the number says, but that's what you're saying.
That's what you're saying.
That's exactly what you're saying. In order for what you're saying to be true, what I just said would have to be true. And that's not true,
Well,
what I just said.
I disagree.
But this is where it's like, if anything, that shows that we should be encouraging tuition students.
yes.
And encouraging outside students to come in, because overall, it ends up lowering our net. And also.
Gets to the fixed cost issue, right?
But it's
Right.
still, but it still
One
covers, but it's still the Kent taxpayers that are covering the
We'd be
lion's share
covering
of
it
the
no matter
cost.
what.
Yeah, but the question is one of fixed costs. That's what the part that's missing in
But
that.
it's a question of what you consider fixed cost. I consider staff fixed cost.
Right.
And that's the big
Absolutely.
difference.
So I think that's exactly, I think Casey's.
Casey, you got a question?
Casey,
You're
you're on mute.
still on mute.
You're on mute, Casey. Mute.
Sorry about that. I was not raising my hand, I was scratching my head, but I mean, the notion, I mean, basically, it's a mathematical issue. If the denominator goes down when you subtract the 22 people, then the cost per pupil goes up. What makes sense is something that obviously people can have disagreement. But I do think there are some people who have no skin in the game in terms of kids in the school, but are certainly of the view that it's money well spent to have a terrific school in Kent for the younger children, who might raise an eyebrow if they said, well, people from New York State can come too for much less money. On the other hand, the argument of that Jason made about diversity in numbers and people having the opportunity to have regular sized classes is a good one. And economically, it sounds like though the percentage number might come down as well. Do we do anything to solicit more students? I mean, should we be doing more things to solicit more students? So it's as the newbie here, I don't think I personally have a view. I am accepting everybody else's views and understand why people have them.
I thought, as I said this at the last meeting, Nancy, with your material, I thought it was useful. Because we have to be informed about this and looking at this issue. I happen to think that if we remove those 20 kids, our fixed costs would not go down. Right, so that's the issue. I think, by the way, I do think there's a magic number in which it becomes a problem or an issue. I just think that we're not there yet, and
There
maybe
certainly
we.
could be, I mean,
Yeah,
I think
right.
nobody's arguing that.
So therefore, but I'm just saying, therefore, we kind of need to be mindful of it, maybe we need to know, what is that magic number, right? Because we know that 20 isn't it, right? We know 20 is basically, you gotta keep the thing running. We have not had the staff up for 20 additional 20.
I can tell you what, 20 would be the magic number if we had more residents. The magic number where it's not worth it to the town is where we would have to hire a new teacher. But to your point, Nancy, I think, and correct, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think the point you're trying to make is that if we got rid of all our tuition students, you came to us at the joint meeting with, I think I called it a proposal, but I don't think you liked that, but I'm gonna use
It
proposal.
wasn't a
Wasn't a
proposal, it was just,
That's right.
Well, it said,
yeah.
the language you used, inferred extra expense or something, it made it sound like you were proposing we don't spend that money, but.
No,
I don't wanna
we
get
need to be
into
aware of what it is.
I think the point you're trying to make is that if we got rid of all our tuition students, you would suggest or posit that it would be possible to fire 8 teachers. And
Not fire, never fire. I never said fire. I said, do not backfill somebody every single time somebody leaves. Those were my words.
Okay.
I would never fire a teacher
I apologize.
unless it was for just cause.
But the economic point we're trying to make here is that the 8 teachers could be
Consolidated down to.
right. And
redeployed.
do with
Yes.
8 less teachers if we were to get rid of the tuition students.
Well, my other point was that you're giving it away $4,500 because it's fabulous education over there.
I don't
And
think we're giving it away.
We're making, that's a judgment, she's making a different point.
Yeah. so,
She's saying, yeah, it's a bargain, absolutely, it's a bargain, but it is a bargain that we can
It serves
afford
us.
because it's actually not hurting us, budget
the
wise.
taxpayers are, covering it.
Can I just finish my point though? So you came up with a number that I think we all agreed at the table. I think you called it, meatball math. It was just quick
It was
running of the
taking
numbers.
the number of staff and
Yeah.
the students,
Right, that's
and I don't know how many kids you have
Yeah.
in each class,
But I think we've all agreed that, if we were to, reduce at whatever way at 8, that we wouldn't be at that exact average number. So,
that would be
This-
the most dramatic.
right.
Yeah.
But let's take that most dramatic number, the 470 that you put in there. If you take that and put it into this NCEP calculation, taking that out of our expenditures, it reduces our net current expenditure per pupil from the 30,015 that's listed down to 27,900. So it's like $2,000 per, Then, if you lose 10 students because parents are like, I don't like what's going on at the school here, I'm going somewhere else. That number goes right back up to 29,243. So I really think we're chasing our tails with this argument. It's really not as significant.
We're paying for, private school size classes, and I know a lot of parents love it,
We want more kids there.
so it's so it's more about Sharon, are we talking
So
to
let's
Sharon?
talk about the rest of the region. The other thing I think you're insinuating is that that number, the NCEP, is out of whack somehow. But if we go through the region, Sharon is at 53,217. Canaan or Falls Village is at 35,612. The high school is at 32,22.
I'm not saying it's out of.
Cornwall is 31,316. Kent is listed at 315 or $30 and $15. Salisbury and North Canaan are down at 27,000. Norfolk, which is right up there also, is at
About like
30,000.
80 kids in the school.
Right.
Yeah.
Region 12, which is a thriving school district, is at 35,000. So we're well within, we're at the lower end of that group.
Region 12 has a high school.
This number represents K through 12. This number, this NCEP represents K through 12 in Kent, and it's not all taxpayer money. They also include expenditures from federal funds, federal fund grants. So they have $5,689,756.
That's with the
expenditures from.
That's with the ESSER money.
That was only 100,000 more. So if you go down to without the ARPA, it's still $201,000 from federal grants, just normal federal grants that we get every year through the
Right.
region. So that number, that's what I'm saying. It's not representing exactly what you're saying it's representing. The
It's not
taxpayers
like
are,
feds are picking up, the lion's share. I mean, let's face it.
well, the 319 is, close to, it's take about 1,000 off of what you're saying there. So.
Yeah, this is where I'm confused, because it's saying it costs. The blunt way to put this is to say that it costs $30,000 per student.
It's what we're paying per student.
I understand, but that's
a big distinction.
That's a very subtle distinction that most people don't understand. So if you say $30,000 per student, all of a sudden, people are like, oh, well, they should be paying $30,000. It really only changes. I just did the back repo math too. Even if we changed, it's like I got 27,960.
And when you say that, you're insinuating for everybody that we take a tuition student and then our budget goes up 30,000 for that student, but we're only collecting 4,500.
No,
That's what you say. You said the difference between that number is not
yes,
fair.
but I'm not saying that
Right.
that's what your budget's going up. I never said that. You're
Well,
putting
that's
words
a
in my
very
mouth.
important point. I agree with you. What I heard, by the way, I agree with you. That's what I heard, what you just said, which is what I heard at the last meeting also, which is we shouldn't be afraid to lay this all out,
Mhm.
which is the whole point. And I think there's, as I said, there is somewhere between, because of what we're gonna pay no matter what to run that school. And there's a magic number instead of per, but also. I did the math, I know, and I gave it to all of you for 2 months to look at.
I understand challenge,
I mean, I would want to see 10 more students.
Right, me too.
This just makes me want, as a taxpayer that does not have kids in the town or in the school, that likes that we have a good school, I would encourage people to come to the school, because then some of the parents come to work in town, they spend money in town, they want to move into town, and like I said at the last meeting, the biggest barrier right now is affordable housing. We don't have any housing in this town for people to live who can not come in with a lot of money.
Well, we're moderate income housing. Careful gap there
That's
too.
right.
I say affordable housing, I mean anything under a million. But that's where we're at in this town.
Yeah.
I think last time I looked, there was a $9 million house for sale up on the hill, that's out of most people's, it's definitely out of my budget.
Some of the people who grew up here can't
That's
afford to live here
That's right.
because, it's just.
I wouldn't mind, by the way, I wouldn't mind. This seems to be an ongoing thing. I think frankly that the townspeople also, because we hear this,
Mhm.
this is not out of thin air. This is because we do keep hearing this. And
Then it needs to be explained.
well, both needs to be explained and maybe a little more analysis,
I know
I
you guys.
Oh, no, I understand. No, that's not what the point I want to make is, it might be worth paying a consultant a couple of $1,000 to basically do the real analysis so that we can, because the town people really want to know the answer. And there's lots of data out there. But I wouldn't mind something where we can all conclusively be able to explain to this town what it actually is costing.
I think a great start would be to point out where my document saying that it's $500 is wrong. That would be a great place to start.
And I think you're being too defensive.
No, because I don't think it's a discussion. If you don't think that that document is wrong, then we all accept that number. But if you don't accept that number, I think a good place to start before spending money to hire somebody would be to posit where that went wrong, where that calculation went wrong.
But I
What did
think
we miss? And by the way, if we did miss something, we would be changing tuition at the next board meeting. We have no intention of costing the town money. We don't want that. And we're not here saying that we're in a perfect position, that this is the population we want at the school, you know, or less, you know, we want more.
Yeah, we all want,
We
we want
wanna-
young families to come to Kent.
Yeah, and that can't be the Board of Education's job. We can help. We'd be happy to do anything, but town-wide, we need to start thinking about what direction are we headed in? We want to pack that school with Kent kids.
Would be nice,
Yeah.
but since Kent kids aren't available, tell us more about Sharon.
They might be looking.
Yeah, well, are you marketing, are you working it?
Am I marketing? Oh, I don't understand your question.
As we're doing a little
Oh,
business
sorry.
marketing, that's just-
No, we're
As
not.
we would say in the business world, a little business development activity perhaps might be, right, you know.
I think that would be frowned upon. I have to go to a lot of meetings with regional people, you know, I can't be poaching kids from their schools.
No, but I think we'd
It's a
like,
long way to
but I
go.
do think we'd like to be on their list of alternatives as they're looking at what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I
Right.
would be all for it, but I'm joking, but I'm serious. I mean, it would be pretty bad form, I think, to be trying to poach kids out of other schools.
Oh, it's not opposed, I just say, we have to make that hard decision.
Yeah.
The community has to go
We'll walk
through
away
that.
with hope.
Absolutely.
Well, and I do think it is something, again, our advice, because you guys decide, but it is the kind of conversation that would happen board member to board member.
Yeah.
That's how those things happen. But, so again, we're giving you a little piece of advice. You know, as someone who's not on the school board, but those are the types of conversations that when you're on a board.
I don't think about
Yes.
that, you know, walk that through. I go up to another board member in another town and say, send some of your kids to our school.
No,
I'm not gonna.
well, right, I understand that, but I think they are obviously wrestling with this issue and we don't know how they're wrestling with it, so.
Yeah,
I think
they are
that-
wrestling.
Yeah, and therefore I don't think it's a bad thing to kind of know that we certainly would be open to.
Well, we're on the record, you know.
I know we are, but
We're accepting
Right,
applications.
but also, I mean, just simply that, the fact of the matter is that you've got a school board that will certainly be one to collaborate with them to address, you know, if there's a way that you can collaborate and be helpful to them and also get some benefit, you know, in terms of scale, et cetera. I don't know what that solution is, but it certainly is something that if you guys aren't at least in contact with each other, you're never gonna know.
Oh, we're in contact every month. Okay, we meet every month together.
Yeah.
The chairs of the board.
Look at Litchfield and Wamoga, it's happening everywhere.
It's happening all over the state.
That's right.
I have one more tuition background question, which is, has the fee been the same since we started it? Has it been $4,500?
Past like 4 years, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, for this past iteration.
Right,
when
so forgetting the arguments as to how much extra it's costing, or the value or any of that. I mean, I don't know of any tuition program that has stayed flat for 5 years. I mean, clearly there's, and especially this year in inflation, and the notion of having some regular increase in the 4,500, whatever, you know, the bottom line is, would seem to be something that people would expect more than feel was weird.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I'll make a promise to you that we'll put that on the next Board of Education meeting to discuss.
Okay, I mean, and you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be 25,000, so we're up at 29,000. And I would think when you discuss it, the question should be, you know, is this something on a small percentage basis we should do every year? But, you know, I can't think of it, you know, and you know, it's not just colleges and universities, it's basically every prep school and private school.
You're absolutely right, and that's a good suggestion.
Okay, but we should talk just about, maybe present, I'll take a look at the data you had shared with us again.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and let's see if we can agree on a presentation of that, but it's just frankly mindful. I do think that aggregate number, which is the one, whether they see the real number or just have a sense amongst themselves, our voters in this town are concerned about. And so we both have to be able to contextualize that.
I would love, and that was a lot of the reason behind the joint meeting. I was hoping we could get on the same page with this and we could
I
approach it
think we are
together.
kind of on the same page.
I think we're getting there.
Yeah, okay, yeah, but these, there are tough decisions, and I think the people of this town expect us to confront them.
Yeah, okay, I'm all for it. Okay, I'd love to talk to you about it more.
Okay, very good.
But I do think that regardless of whether the right number is 500 or
Right.
1,000.
Yes.
The point is, we're still, the fee, the tuition charge is still multiples of that, whether it's
Yes.
But we've got to
5%.
find a way to kind of wrap that up so
Yeah.
that, right, people.
That's understandable.
That's right.
Exactly.
You know,
Right. I think we need to.
and that's not a bad test, because if we can't, then there's also something wrong. Okay,
And then you have to look at it too, as what is that magic figure that would, yeah, that would, you know,
Would stop accepting.
or not accepting, or when it would impact the budget, which would mean maybe another teacher or another addition, and how that.
I just want to, again, I think we've talked about this, but it says explicitly in our policies that the Board of Education is not allowed to accept a tuition student if it will, you know, cause us to hire an additional.
And you're already
Which is
addressing it.
different than your point, you know, maintaining.
So another question for you, if a special needs a student applies to the school, are they allowed in?
I think it would be reviewed, and the way our language is that the $4,500 charge is for like a general ed student. So if the applicant needed additional services, then we have the right to not accept them, or we can renegotiate.
or you may find
Right.
some way, because there may be some state assistance that they can get or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that that's happening.
It hasn't, and it's a delicate conversation, you know, you have to be careful about how you phrase that, but the bottom line is that we have control over that. It says, you know, clearly in our policy that covers just the basics, and anything above that would have to be negotiated to continue as a student.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're on to the annual report update, so we finally got everything, Brian.
I'm still waiting for Barbara's report.
Okay.
That.
And so then.
She hasn't sent it to me yet.
Well, she just got the audit.
I know, so
Yeah,
hopefully within next month.
all right, great, great. We're progressing.
Yes.
All right. The capital appropriation policy seems to keep being reported. Okay, so Barbara said she wanted us to just decide what we want to do. So is this something that you all want to do?
I think it's important. I think especially given the issues facing the capital expenditures previously, I think we owe it to the town to have this control in place.
I guess the question is, and maybe there's a little homework for all of us here, which is, I mean, both my eyes glisten whenever I read
Yeah.
this thing, but I think maybe it is, both I have to make myself and maybe tell, say, when you go through this, these are actually the critical issues that have to need a decision made on, and here's why, you know, I think that's kind of what's getting in the way of this, you
Well,
know.
but part of it is that, I mean, this is not a cookbook approach, no, you know, if X happens, then you must do Y.
Right.
That's not the intent of it, it's more the spirit of it. So I don't want to constrain us, I don't want to constrain the selectmen of the town. But
A few
we
principles would
we
be.
need to have something, I mean, some things have just been lingering,
Right.
along the way.
I agree with that. I think that putting constraints on it leads us into trapping ourselves down the road. But the way it's currently drafted, I think gives us the flexibility, but gives us a roadwork and a roadmap in which to say, hey, there's some controls in place where we're not gonna let $100,000 linger in a fund for 10 years.
Right.
That doesn't then go back into the town.
Right.
It not get used for its intended purpose.
So I would like to put this to bed, because we've been talking about it now for months.
I'm fine with making a motion to approve the policy and guidelines for capital fund.
Yeah, I'm not happy with the way it's written, I got a bunch of edits on mine. So I think that we need to take a look at, come back and do the.
So can we, why don't we just put a pin on it for the next meeting, including, but we need,
Could you send
it's
the
like,
draft?
yeah.
You read it in
And
draft.
you did, we got,
Well, I'm gonna send you my
Okay.
marked up one, and then you can just scribble all
okay,
over.
and then I promise that I'm actually gonna put on my little visor and, yes, okay.
And yeah, you're getting mixed in the So our next meeting is Wednesday. Now, you won't have time to do this by Wednesday.
Next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday is the board of selectmen budgets.
Oh. Okay, gotcha,
So, oh,
okay,
please be
the
here.
answer is yes.
You too, Casey.
Right,
So,
the board of selectmen,
Yeah, I'm fine, I think that, I'm fine with that.
okay.
yeah, all right, so if you all will do it, then
Okay.
I'll put it on the next agenda because it just keeps lumping them
I know.
in here. I will.
Okay, right.
Yes, yeah, but I'm gonna leave it with my chicken scratch on it,
That's
so
fine.
Oh, perfect,
you may
yeah.
not be able to read it.
And send us a PDF.
Did you're saying you're gonna send us a marked up version, Nancy?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's marked up in handwriting, sloppy handwriting, so
Which is fine.
I'll apologize ahead of time. Okay, so the next thing we have on the agenda is comments from the public and invited guests. And I want to read a statement to you all. The public comments are welcome. Each speaker will have an opportunity to speak once prior to any speaker commenting for an additional time. No town employee or community member should be defamed within a public comment. So everybody will get one turn, and then if people wish to speak again, of course, they're welcome to speak again. But again, we'll just keep rotating it through. So is there anybody here who would like to speak? Debbie,
I just have a comment or a question for the school board. Is that okay?
for the what?
For the school board, that's okay? I have a general question about the paraprofessionals. I'm just confused. We have very small classes, and where do they go and how many are there? And you know, without getting into individual students or something, but I'm just confused about why they're necessary in such a small class.
You don't have the count, I'm sorry, I don't have the count, you know.
Or just a general,
Well, they are, you know, I don't know if we should really use names, I guess, but
no, I don't want names, I just.
Is it a
want-
state rule? Is it a board rule? I mean, I guess that's really.
Yeah, like if you have a class of 7 kids and a teacher,
well, there's no parent in the classroom with a teacher. In that
okay,
case.
I guess that's where, that's sort of my general question.
I know the parents are used for, you know, in situations like a teacher needs to leave the classroom to take a phone call or, you know, so they can fill in, watch the classroom
So
in that
there's
case.
one that drips there.
Yeah, they are kind of a variable schedule.
Floaters,
You know,
Drifters.
But there are some that are not.
there are,
There are some who
Yeah.
are assigned to
A particular student. in
well,
that
some
classroom.
or a classroom.
so we use some to help with the enrichment, the math enrichment, the, you know, supervised by a teacher now in this case, or, you know, somebody with a more, you know, higher degree, but I can give you more detail on how they're used.
I just, you know, it's just, I'm a former teacher, and to me, to have a class with 7 kids is good and bad, but I don't know if I would need another professional than
And in
that.
that case, they would,
Okay,
I think the fair thing to say is there are classrooms who have a para in them standardly every day. There are specific students who have
okay,
a
that's
para.
a different situation.
Yes.
Thank you, yeah, that's helpful. I have a second question, but I'll raise my hand a second time.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
there's 6.
Oh, thank you.
Laura Hanson, thank you for letting me speak. It's my first time at one of these meetings, very interesting. I've lived in this town going on 7 years now. I have a son that is in kindergarten. I have a daughter that is in nursery school. And I was just, it's very interesting to hear your conversation this past year, probably, maybe going on a year and a half now. I joined the nursery school board in town. And have become fairly proficient about the early childhood education and kind of the status of Kent versus Cornwall and other communities. So as you're talking, I find it very interesting. My husband also grew up in Warren, and we're in our 40s. So he's obviously explained about the evolution of these communities. We were just at the Wimoga Litchfield basketball game the other night. It was fantastic. And hearing the families over there and the evolution has been really interesting. So I was just curious to raise one question before I proceed. How many of you are familiar, at least from the education standpoint, where the student body is coming from before they hit Kent Center School? Fran, you're not allowed to answer.
I'm not.
You're not, okay. So just like,
I have some knowledge of it. I was a board member, Board of Ed member, and I was also president of the nursery school board for 5 years.
oh, okay, I taught for 13. So basically, today we have the preschool that is attached to the Kent School, right, for those families. And then you have the nursery school here in town. Last year, I thought it was really interesting when I joined the board, we had families representing 7 different towns in our nursery school. We had Cornwall, and we still have families from different towns, but we had Warren, we had Cornwall, we had Wingdale, we had Sherman, we had Gaylordsville, we had New Milford, and we had Kent. So I don't know if the board is fully aware, like we really do kind of sit at this crossroads. And I would say too, 5 of those students that I'm aware of in the past 2 years matriculated into Kent Center School, right? So even though we don't have a formal relationship with the Board of Education, we really act, at least in our group, as this kind of entryway into Kent Center School. I think to your point, there is a huge opportunity for collaboration. I have friends that are teachers in Sharon that have really been struggling with the dwindling class size. My first year here, I also coached basketball, so I played college basketball. I coached basketball both for the girls at Kent School and the boys at Kent Center School. We had half of our games canceled that year because Cornwall, Sharon, Fallsville could not field teams. It's a real challenge for the young people here. So growing our numbers and figuring out a way to collaborate and embrace other communities, I would say something I see as a big opportunity for the future. The other thing I would throw on your radar if you are going to go forward and do an assessment is look at what's happening in surrounding towns. The town of Washington. You familiar with what is happening there with their early childhood education? So they've now folded it into the primary school. So they've taken the nursery school out of sitting separately, and it's a part of the school there. Same thing in Sharon, it actually sits inside of the school there. So I would just, obviously everything is changing. It was interesting to look back at the numbers. I think the numbers almost doubled for parents that were paying to go from school last year to this year for Kent Center. You look at the park and rec numbers, those have obviously grown. And the interesting thing is so many people say, well, COVID's over, people are going back to the city. One of my friends just left, she has 2 children. They left the city, moved here and are permanent residents now and are planning to stay. So even though some people might think, well, COVID's over, people are gonna go away, that number has actually stayed flat. If anything, it's still increasing. So I would urge you, please go ahead and do an assessment. Look at what are happening with other surrounding, meet with us at the nursery school, because we are a pipeline for what the future, we can give you a forecast of what your school is gonna look like next year. We have an amazing head of school, great, networks within the community. We're actually opening up for the first time this summer. I'm really excited to be offering that. It's something we listen to the community and react. And I would say that's the beauty of Kent. It's a small town. A lot of people know each other. We can collaborate and make things happen. We have an amazing school that's already here, right? And I think there's an opportunity to just continue to expand and grow this school because nobody wants to live in a community where there are no children.
That's right.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Good.
I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm sure somebody in the Board of Ed, what was the agreed upon contracted salary rates for the teachers? I didn't follow that
It's about 4% a year on a 3-year contract.
for years. Thanks.
Yes, Donna.
Just a quick question, I guess. You are being recorded on Zoom at this point in time. This is a very important topic, and they will be for the next couple of weeks or months until the budget is actually approved. Any way that you could put the Zoom link out there so that everybody can watch these meetings at home? It's just a point, especially.
That's our
the
goal.
budget
Yes,
is
you are.
You're so important. I went crazy tonight looking for information that was going to be discussed tonight, and there's nothing there, and there was no Zoom link. So I'm just asking for a Zoom link.
Let me answer your question. So the reason it was not put out like a general notice with, when the agenda went to the town clerk was because the last meeting it was explained to us that we don't have the capacity yet to take that many people on technologically. That's what the first selectman told us, and so we were told we needed to, oh, you're right here. You answer it.
Right. So as I think you probably know, this equipment has been, we've had to fine tune, mostly the equipment that you see on the beams. We've had to fine tune and fine tune and fine tune because this room is an utter nightmare to mic. So everybody up there can hear, everybody on Zoom coming out can hear, but once you get into the room, it's been just an absolute bear to figure out. Joyce is pretty sure we're at the point where we have it well figured out, and I think this is actually another perfect sort of test run tonight to see what that recording sounds like as they did increase some of the microphones.
And then are we gonna be able, because that's what I. The live, or are people gonna be able to tune in? Like for this meeting, like Casey can, because he's participating.
Absolutely.
But can the residents of the town?
Absolutely, it will be a fully hybrid.
Okay.
So the next meeting, which is Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, I can put that on the agenda. There's some information and send it to the town clerk.
Let's double check with Joyce. Because she's been the primary point of contact with the vendor on this. So I don't want to jump the gun.
I will need to know by the end of the week, please.
But Donna, the other part of your question is putting the recording out for people to be able to listen to, right? Or did you mean just to participate?
Just participate, because the Zoom will come out as recording later on. But the other thing is to also have a public folder out there that contains documentation, coming from the land use portion of this. We always had all of the information that's going to be discussed in a public meeting folder, so anyone can go to that folder and pull out the information that's going to be discussed, either print it out or they can follow along.
By the way, and we had a Democratic Town Committee meeting a couple of weeks ago where people were saying that more than anything, which is what our goal is in transparency, so that people, if we want to up the number of people who participate in these town meetings, we've got to make it easier.
Right.
Okay.
Especially the budget. I mean, it's very, very important to a lot of people, so, all the budgets.
Kate, is this different technology than last year's, this year and last year?
Yes, it's different.
Yeah, so today's budget hearing was difficult.
I can work with Bonnie to go through that process of setting up public meeting folders that you can put a link on the agenda so that this documentation can get all populated.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else want to?
Debbie. Okay, Deb.
This is my second question. You talked about kids leaving Kent Center and going to private school. Do you do, I know they do, because I've lost people. So we know for sure about that. Do you do sort of like an exit interview with the parents? Because really, we shouldn't be losing your kids to private school. Sorry, but we got a good school. Why are we losing them? I guess.
I don't know high school level. Do you know when they graduate?
No. I mean, grade school kids going to other private grade schools.
I don't know if I have,
Kind of a formal process,
They
maybe
do.
they wouldn't want to participate,
No,
but
Michelle does do that.
then use it. What you find out, use.
Yeah. I think I'll just.
Okay. Because we shouldn't be losing
I
kids.
agree 100%. I agree 100%.
Tuition's one thing, but don't lose what we've got.
James, did you need to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of go and helicopter a little bit. I mean, we all know that upon graduation at 8th grade, there's a big move to private schools, obviously. How many, what's the percentage or what are the numbers like? Where you, where students are leaving?
Yeah.
You said less than 50%, right? About.
No, they're leaving.
To transfer to.
Before, no, sorry, I meant 50% go to the high
Right,
school.
yes, I knew that, but before then, what Debbie's talking to,
Yeah.
It's very small.
It's got-
It's a very small percentage.
Well, it's a huge percentage of
So
the
small
intended
amount.
part of the increase.
Yeah.
Lost.
You're right.
So at that point, it's a huge percentage.
It's because we're talking about small numbers.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
small numbers,
Yeah.
No, I mean overall, so
Yeah.
yeah, a couple makes a big percentage, you're right.
but they came in and they left. So
I mean, I don't know if that's just it is, but my, I think that part of it might be lifestyle. You know what I mean?
That's what it is, that's what it is, that's an honest answer,
Sure.
but that's our lifestyle.
it's you.
Well, I mean, we can't put in school, you know what I mean? It's not, it doesn't have the same gesture. And, but I should probably stop there, but, yes, it's a very good point, and we do, we do that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment?
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Steve Penner, and I have 2 kids at Kent Center School currently. I was I was the only person who showed up to a Board of Ed meeting a couple of years ago when they were discussing this tuition. At that point, I think they were charging around $12,000 a year for out of towners, and was the only person who showed up and said, "Hey, why don't you lower that? Lower it a lot." And I thought the number they came up with was actually too high. I was hoping they would bring it down to about $2,000 per student. I think it's a creative way to use the school and to fill out classrooms and to have sports teams for our kids. And I think too much time is being allocated to discussing this issue. It's a very small percentage of the student body. It pays for itself. And I think everyone should move on from this issue and focus on some other issues like how do we create affordable housing or spur economic development in this town. I think that would be a much better and productive and proactive approach for our Board of Finance and for our Board of Selectmen and for the town in general. So, thank you.
Anyone else? One more time, anyone else wish to make a public comment? All right, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
in honor of Jim.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Casey, see you when you're back.
Next week.